Ladies and gentlemen, this man is a genius. I am not kidding. I am not awestruck or I don't fanboy anyone. I don't. I just don't care. I got to tell you, the only time I think I'd be at a loss for words is if I ran into Thomas Sowell. So, the great Mark Levin, he's called the great one for a reason. There is no other great one. Human beings, of course. We love Mark Levin. He had the fantabulous, incredible, one of the smartest human beings I have ever read or come across or read his material, Thomas Sowell on Life, Liberty, and Levin. Did you see it? If you did not see it last night, Sunday, you made a huge mistake because Thomas Sowell is incredible and Mark Levin is a genius. And it was one of the great interviews I've seen in a long time. So Mark had Thomas Sowell on, and you know my favorite book of all time, right? The Vision of the Anointed by Thomas Sowell changed my life. That is my favorite book of all time. I love it. Buy a copy, buy 1,000 copies and give them out to everyone you know. Maybe someone will read it. It'll change their life too. So Thomas Sowell, economist, philosopher, and just all around great human being was on last night. He was asked by Mark about the term systemic racism, which is a meaningless term. It doesn't actually mean anything because when you ask people to define it and what systemic racism, meaning there's a system, that they'll never tell you what the system is. Because whenever they use the term systemic racism, they're oddly always talking about liberal cities where the system's liberal. So they avoid answering the question. So Mark asked Thomas Sowell about systemic racism, and here was his answer, which is just great.
You hear this phrase, systemic racism, systemic oppression. You hear it on our college campuses. You hear it from very wealthy and fabulously famous sports stars. You hear it from media types. You hear it. First of all, what does that mean? And whatever it means, is it true?
It really has no meaning that can be specified and tested in the way that one tests hypotheses. It does remind me of the propaganda tactics of Joseph Goebbels during the age of the Nazis, in which he's supposed to have said that people will believe any lie if it's repeated long enough and loud enough. And that's what we're getting. I don't think, it's one of many words that I don't think even the people who use it have any clear idea what they're saying. Their purpose is served by having other people cave in.
Ladies and gentlemen, this man is a genius. I am not kidding. I am not awestruck or I don't fanboy anyone. I don't. I just don't care. I got to tell you, the only time I think I'd be at a loss for words is if I ran into Thomas Sowell. I thought I saw him one time at an airport. I thought he was I'm not sure if it was him or not. He was far away. And the only thing that stopped me from going and grabbing who I thought was Thomas, so he was too far away for me to make out any kind of positive ID. The only thing that stopped me was I was running for office and the media person I was with was like, we got to go. This is one of the great legends of our time. He deserves the Presidential Medal of Freedom for the genius that he is. His book, again, Vision of the Anointed, is a life-changing book about the failure of far-left radical ideology. My admiration for him is deep. The man is 90 years old, and congratulations to Mark Levin for scoring that interview. If you haven't watched the show, at this point, I don't know. If you didn't DVR it, you got to DVR Mark's show, Life, Liberty, and Levin. It's important. But I'm sure you can go to your Comcast app or whatever it is and watch it, or just you need to watch it. It was a really fantastic show. Sowell has a new book out, too, about charter schools. Show you how great Thomas Sowell is. I've been watching his videos for years. They've changed my life. I'm not, that's not hyperbolic. I've changed my life, meaning I would be a different person now without the commentary and writings and thoughts of the legendary Thomas Sowell. Here's one of my favorites, a little over a minute. This is from decades ago. But this is Thomas Sowell in his younger days on a debating show with a far-left radical woman named Helen O'Banion, who was a Pennsylvania bureaucrat in charge of welfare programs. And the reason this is important, this segment, is because Thomas Sowell is great at debunking fallacies, false arguments used to advance fake stories. He addresses two of them here, and I'll play the clip for you in a minute. I encourage you to listen to every word of this because it's a genius. I've never seen this man lose a debate, Sowell, ever. The left always loves to start the story in the middle. That'll make sense after you see this clip. You'll see what I mean. But secondly, they always engage in the broken leg fallacy. The broken leg fallacy, meaning a broken leg, they treat it with the same thing that broke the leg. In other words, they try to bring in government remedies for problems the government caused themselves and then ignore the fact that the government caused it. So keep those two things in mind, how the left always starts the story in the middle and how they propose government solutions for problems the government caused and they expect you to thank them for it. Watch Sowell just totally dismantle this woman in this classic, epic clip.
Cut off welfare tomorrow. What will they do? What will be their immediate response? At what price to their small children and to their middle-aged children? Yes, they'll get a job. In fact, the statistics show that women, in fact, are the most successful through the employment program. But what has to supplement that typically is the provision of some kind of daycare arrangement. Either the individual woman has to earn enough money to be able to pay privately for her daycare, or in fact she is, quote, subsidized through this insidious corrupting set of programs run by the federal government, which in fact makes her employable and a taxpayer. It's an interesting notion of trying to get people in a productive mode.
Tom Sowell.
It's incredible the way you start the story in the middle, as if there's a predestined amount of poverty, a predestined amount of unemployment, and that the welfare system is not itself in any way responsible for that.
There is a predestined 20% of the bottom half of the population.
I have never, that's always been true. And
There's going to be 20% at the bottom.
Agree with you. It's also true that 20% of the bottom population doesn't have to be living on the government and ruled by the government. You mentioned, for example, the female-headed household. Many of those, in addition to the grown woman who has all the kids, are teenage pregnancies. There's not a predestined amount of teenage pregnancy. I grew up in an era when people, and particularly blacks, were a lot poorer than today, faced a lot more discrimination than today, and in which the teenage pregnancy rate was a lot lower than today. I don't believe there is a predestined amount of teenage pregnancy, a predestined amount of husband desertion. Gutman has done a study of the black family showing that this whole notion that the black family has always been disintegrating, that is nonsense, that his studies go up to 1925, the great bulk of black families were intact, two-parent families up through 1925, and going all the way back through the era of slavery. So it is now only within our own time that we suddenly see this inevitable tragedy which the welfare system says it's going to rush in to solve, but which it is itself a part.
The man is a genius. I'm in awe of his genius. Now, that was a complicated clip, but it's worth your time to just dig through a bit what he's saying there. The woman, Helen O'Banion, who I don't know, I've never met, I don't know if she's still around. If not, God rest her soul. She's trying to make the argument that, well, if we were to take mothers off welfare, what are we going to do with them? And Sowell comes back and he says, well, that's fascinating that you've started that kind of book in the middle, never asking, well, how did they get on welfare in the first place? And then her argument is in return is, well, there's always going to be people on welfare. There's a bottom 20%. And Sowell's like, huh? What are you suggesting? You're suggesting somehow that people are predestined to be poor and stupid or something? What are you suggesting? What are you suggesting? I mean, isn't it, Sowell's, in other words, getting to the heart of it, isn't that kind of racist and classist that somehow there's a predestined lower 20% that just cannot escape their own mental incapacities and inability to work? None of that's true. None of that's true. None of that is true. There is a bottom 20%, some on welfare, precisely because of incentives set up by a government system that has caused this chaos. And he challenged her and says, you're totally removing any responsibility of the welfare system as it's set up in and of itself, declaring there's always going to be a bottom 20, which he laughs at, by the way, because, ladies and gentlemen, if you understand simple, you don't even need to understand math. If you just understand common sense, Joe, of course there's always going to be a bottom 20%. Sowell's point is, if the bottom 20% are doing really well, then they're not necessarily poor. In other words, if everybody was making $1 trillion and the bottom 20% are making $1 million in real money, no one's crying for the bottom 20%. She's suggesting that there's people destined to be poor, ignorant, who are in this fixed bottom 20%, and the government's going to come in and save the day. Government's causing that. These people aren't predestined for anything. The people in that bottom 20%, many are there because the government has destroyed their lives. They have set up a set of incentives that many of these people could not escape. The government has failed them. Stop starting the story in the middle. Let's get to the root of the problem first. And she says that this bottom 20% is almost inevitable, what she's hinting at, to make you believe that the government had no role in it. That's why she's doing that. And Sowell immediately catches it. That's not true. Of course, by simple math, you're always going to have a bottom 20%. That doesn't mean they have to be poor. The bottom 20%, you want just a simple example? The bottom 20% in Indonesia makes far less money than the bottom 20% in the United States, right? But there's a bottom 20%. Yeah, but relative condition matters. How did the bottom 20% in India make as much as they make versus the bottom 20% here? Something's different. Governing systems are different. They do this all the time, the left. Don't let them get away with it. Sowell's just a genius with that.
You just heard Dan Bongino.